If we just look at the turbines we produced and shipped last year, those will actually avoid more than 450 million tons of greenhouse gas emissions over their lifetime, which is a huge contribution.
Welcome to The Great Switch, a podcast series by Schneider Electric, sharing the experiences of visionaries and innovators making an impact towards a sustainable and efficient world. In The Great Switch, we talk to decision makers across the Nordics to explore how technology, leadership and bold ideas are driving the green transition forward. I'm your host Oliver Åberg, and today we're joined by Lisa Ekstrand, VP and Head of Sustainability at Vestas, a Danish-based global leader in sustainable energy solutions within the wind turbine industry. In this episode, we'll hear how Vestas is working to cut emissions across both operations and supply chain, how partnerships and new tech are key to circularity, and how big goals become real results when the whole company gets behind them. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
So nice to have you. And to start this off, I'd like to hear, how are you a part of the great switch of the energy landscape, driving it towards sustainability?
Thank you for the question, and thanks again for inviting me to the Great Switch podcast. It's really great to be here. But as perhaps just a few words about who we are. So Vestas is a global leader in sustainable energy solutions. And what we do at Vestas is that we are designing, manufacturing, installing and service wind turbines. And we are super proud that we have done that more than anyone else. But in terms of driving the energy landscape towards sustainability, first and foremost, the fact that we are contributing to increasing the share of renewables into the grid, we of course have a huge impact. As an example, if we just look at the turbines we produced and shipped last year, those will actually avoid more than 450 million tons over their lifetime, 450 million tons of greenhouse gas emissions over their lifetime, which is a huge contribution. But beyond that, and that's where my role comes in, is of course when we are producing and manufacturing wind turbines, of course that also comes with an environmental footprint, such as CO2 emissions as well as waste. And looking ahead, as our industry and of course also Vestas continues to grow and scale, of course addressing that footprint becomes even more relevant. So my role at Vestas is really to make sure we embed sustainability in everything we do. And what that means is to really reduce emissions from our own operations, from our supply chain, but also to make sure that we are minimizing waste in our operations as well as increasing recycling. It's also to make sure that sustainability is part of our core value proposition to our customers, but of course also that we are compliant with the reporting obligations linked to sustainability.
All right. So your role in this, I think we will deep dive into that, in during and throughout this podcast. But how would you say that? Like, is there one great switch that you championed that made a sustainable impact within Vestas?
The sustainability successes we've had so far is, of course, the result of a lot of people working on this within the company, and there's quite a few things that I am very proud of, but to mention some, I think the fact that we have introduced low-emission steel as an option for our wind turbine towers is one thing. We use a lot of steel in our wind turbine towers, and as many people know, steel is very CO2 intensive to make. And by introducing a low-emission steel option made out of scrap steel, we are able to reduce the emissions significantly. So that's something that I'm very proud of. And beyond that, of course, also that we have, together with some great partners, innovated a solution that will make wind turbine blade recycling possible, and that we're working on scaling up right now.
Is that something, like looking at the, as you say, the partnerships around development and so on, is that something that is like a part of the core of what Vestas is doing, like, or do you develop most of your things like by yourself?
It is a mixed picture, but collaboration is absolutely key. I would say internal collaboration, of course. We need to all work together across the different functions in the company to deliver on our sustainability strategy, but definitely also collaboration with our suppliers, but also our customers. I am of the firm opinion that in order to be successful when it comes to sustainability, you need to have collaboration across the value chain. So, for example, the low-emission steel option is something we have taken forward together with one of our steel suppliers. And we now have some customers that have decided to also purchase this when they have ordered some wind turbines from us. And the blade recycling innovation is a collaboration with academic partners, but also suppliers. So collaboration is definitely key. I think it's to really succeed on sustainability, you can't do that by yourself. You really need to work with close partners to drive this forward.
Vestas committed itself to science-based decarbonization of its own operations and its supply chain by 2030. A visionary and ambitious goal is setting the standard for other industrial companies. This undertaking requires huge changes in everything from facility management to energy sourcing and controlling the supply chain. Can you give us an overview of how you are working towards decarbonization, such as as a large international active company?
Yes. So I think there are many ways of approaching an ambitious decarbonization roadmap or targets. But the way that we have chosen to do it is that we have taken it in a programmatic approach. So we have one program running for scope 1 and 2 emissions. And if you are not familiar with scope 1 and 2 emissions, that's the emissions you have in your own operations. And then we have one program running for scope 3 emissions. And scope 3 emissions is basically your supply chain emissions. And if I start with how we have approached then scope 1 and 2 emissions, so scope 2 emissions, there we have already reached almost zero emissions because we decided to switch a couple of years ago to only be powered by 100% renewable electricity. Scope 1 emissions, we have split that up into different hotspots. So basically taking a look at where do we have our biggest emission sources when it comes to scope 1 emissions. And for Vestas, that means the emissions that comes from service, manufacturing, and construction, although the bulk of emissions comes from service. Almost 80% of our emissions in scope 1 comes from our service activities. And what that means when we try to reduce our emissions from our service activities, that means looking at the fuels we use for our service vehicles that we use when we are servicing onshore wind farms, and the fuels we use in the vessels we use when we service offshore wind farms. That's where we have our big emissions coming from service. We decided early on to make a program for introducing electric vehicles or renewable fuel vehicles, and we're taking that step by step. And to date, we have reached roughly a 26% penetration of electric vehicles in our service vehicle fleet, and we are increasing that year by year. When it comes to introducing sustainable fuels for our vessels, the technology there is taking a bit of a time, but we are trying out a vessel powered by 100% methanol. So we've signed a 10-year contract for that. So that's a very important step forward. When it comes to emissions from our construction activities, that is to a large extent when we look at our at least from onshore, our onshore activities. That's when we often use generators, diesel generators, when we are constructing wind farms. Because, of course, when we are constructing wind farms, there's often not electricity at the site yet. And there we are now, especially in Europe, introducing hybrid generators to reduce emissions from construction activities. when we look at manufacturing, for us, that is really the fuels we use or the energy we use to heat up our factories, but also the energy or the fuels we use for equipment to move around components at our factories. And in some factories now, we have replaced heating systems with biomass boilers, starting in Europe. And this year, in some of our factories, we're also introducing electric forklifts. So that's really the approach we have taken to split it up into the different activity areas, look at where we have our emission sources, the biggest ones, that's where we start, and then try to introduce the right initiatives and technology to reduce those emissions. For Scope 3 emissions, that's of course often the biggest challenge because that's your supply chain emissions. And thereby you don't really exercise the same level of control as you do for your own operation emissions. But again, there we have also a program where we have selected again our hotspots in our Scope 3 emissions, and for us that is the materials we use in our wind turbines. So steel, iron, blade-related materials, copper, aluminium, and so on. And then of course also transport. That's another emission source, although quite much smaller than the emissions coming from the materials we use in our wind turbines. And there's basically two levers that you can use to reduce emissions from the components. One is, of course, look at can we design that component in a different way? For example, so we use less materials. That's one way of reducing emissions. But of course, the other is can we use a different type of material or a material that is produced in a less CO2 intensive way? And there again, the low-emission steel option that we now have is a result of exactly that work. So that's the approach we have taken, at least in Vestas, to work towards decarbonizing our emissions from our own operations and supply chain.
Yeah, that sounds like, quite a huge grip that you're taking here, and I hear there, and I think we all understand like you are taking this quite seriously. But we see that last year you stated that the goal to become carbon neutral by 2030 is currently being reassessed. So would you care to elaborate on that? Like what was the main reason for that reassessment?
Absolutely. So the background is that when we set our targets back in 2019, Vestas was a company that did not have offshore as part of the scope. We only had onshore activities, and in early 21, offshore came back to Vestas scope. That, of course, means that today, compared to when we set the target back in 2019, we have a very different scope of activities.
So is that the shipping vessels and so on?
Exactly. So that's, of course, where we have seen then emissions coming from servicing offshore wind farms or constructing offshore wind farms is now part of the scope, which we didn't have. So that is one reason why it was important to us to take a new fresh look at our targets. But what I think is important to say that even though we have this very, very much bigger scope of activities today, is that even if we look at where we are today compared to 2019, we have managed to decouple our growth from emissions. So even though our scope is much bigger, we have still managed to grow the company with almost 50%, while we have reduced emissions with roughly 6 to 7%. So I think that is definitely an achievement. But looking ahead, we of course want to make sure that we have realistic but still ambitious targets. So now this year, it's been 5 years since we got our science-based target validated. And according to the Science-Based Target Initiative, you need to revalidate your target every 5 years. So it's time for us to do that now. And of course, in that process, we will of course take into account the fact that we have a very different scope of activities today compared to 2019. So that is part of that assessment, basically.
All right. But just to stay on that topic for a little bit, would you say that, because you speak about the offshore operations and they being a bigger part of this, is the question more about the carbon reduction compared to profitability, or is it that those kind of carbon neutral options for the offshore operations, that they don't exist, or what is the main reason for that? The offshore is more not that carbon efficient as the onshore operations.
So there are two reasons. One, of course, with a much bigger scope of activity. If we had one emission number in 2019, that number is significantly bigger today. So that is one thing. The other thing, which is more important, is that the maritime sector, of course, they are looking at a lot of different initiatives, and there's new technologies coming, but it's less mature. For example, when we look at electric vehicles, where there has happened a lot over the last couple of years. So basically, the technology is not really there yet to really bring that into the scale we need to really decarbonize our offshore activities. Of course, we follow that super closely, and we have a very good dialogue with our vessel suppliers. And we're now trying the methanol-powered vessel, and again keeping in close dialogue of what will come next. But there is still some maturity that needs to happen within the maritime sector to really bring scale into the new technologies, but also to reduce cost from those technologies. Yeah.
Goals are, of course, essential to drive the change. But besides that, you also need to enable that change. What have been the biggest enablers of reaching the goals you already reached, looking backward?
And I think I may have touched upon that a little bit before, but I would say if I start from an internal point of view, I mean, it's definitely commitment and internal collaboration. You can't have, at least this is my view, that you will not be successful in delivering on an ambitious sustainability strategy if you think that will be completely handled by a group sustainability team only. It is something that will require the engagement of more or less all the different parts of your organization, whether it is procurement, manufacturing, facility management, service, sales, R&D, and so on. You need to make sure that everyone is working in the same direction. I think that is one thing. And of course, then underpinned by clear commitment from the company to really deliver on this. And then from an external point of view, again, it is really collaboration across the value chain. I'm a firm believer of that no one can really drive this alone. It needs to be supported by the suppliers. It needs to be supported by our customers. And I think that's where, in the projects where we have been successful, both on low-emission steel, but also our blade recycling innovation that we're scaling, that has been key factors that we have worked with good partners. So those are the things that I would list as most important.
All right. So you would say that technology play like a big part in this change, or is it like how we have the commitment and those stuff, but the technology is essential, or what's your thoughts?
Technology is absolutely essential. It is often new technology that we need to make this happen. I mean, again, coming back to electric vehicles, we would never have achieved reaching already 26% penetration of EVs in our service vehicle fleet, or now we're also very close to have reached 100% electric benefit car fleet as well, if it wouldn't have been for technology scaling and I think one thing is for benefit cars, because that's just normal smaller cars, but when we talk about electrifying our service vehicle fleet, I mean, then we're talking about fairly big vans that need to be able to carry heavy loads and drive longer distances. And the development that we have seen from the car manufacturers in the last couple of years have been absolutely key for us to deliver on this. Again, coming back to blade recycling, the fact that we spent many years in different research projects with good partners has also, of course, been very key for where we are today with our blade recycling project.
Would you care to dwell a bit more in the recycling part and how that plays out? Yeah.
So maybe take a few steps back and maybe explain why we are focusing so much on this. So we have a product, so a wind turbine that is actually to a large extent recyclable already. So on average, a wind turbine is already between 85 to just over 90% recyclable, also because we use a lot of steel when making wind turbines, and from a recycling point of view, that is a good thing. Although, of course, it's a material that is too intensive to produce. But the remaining component that has been a challenge for our industry is the wind turbine blades. And the reason to that is because they are made out of composites. And they're also, blades are designed to last for 25 to 30 years in conditions that are quite harsh. I mean, we are putting up wind turbines where there is a lot of wind for good reasons. So they are not really designed to be separated when they reach the end of life. They are designed to last. And that was the challenge we had to address. So if we were to recycle the blades after they have reached the end of life, we had to find a way to separate them. To separate the blades so we get access to the different materials in the blade so that they can enter into their own recycling routes. That has been an issue for our industry since I joined the industry, and that's now 15 years. During the last years, we've spent a lot of focus looking at this. How can we actually do that? How can we do something that they were not designed to do? So we teamed up with the Danish Technology Institute, and we teamed up with Aarhus University and with Olean, a big epoxy resin supplier, to see how we can actually find a solution to this. And after a couple of years, with some good collaboration, we actually discovered a way to really, by using a chemical solution, we actually found a way that we could easily separate the blade materials from each other. So basically, putting the blade material fractions into this liquid, we could see that the materials efficiently started to peel off from each other. And once you have access to the different materials, you can put them into their own recycling value chains. However, one thing is, of course, that you have found a way to do this in the lab. Another way is to really scale this up and put it into life. So what we early decided once we had made this discovery was to team up with a recycling partner, with Stena Recycling, a big recycling player in the Nordic countries, to see how we can actually bring this up to scale. So at the end of the day, there is actually a shop where our customers can go when their wind turbine blades have reached the end of life and make sure they are being recycled. So for a couple of years now, we've been working with Stena Recycling, and we are working on a pilot facility to be put up in the next couple of years. And with the learnings from that, of course, we hope to further scale this. So at the end of the day, there is a place where our customers and where also when we have our own blades that needs to be taken care of, we can actually send them to a place and having them fully recycled. And on top of that, as part of this project, what we have also looked into is see how can we actually, once the blade materials have gone through this process and we got access to the different materials, can we actually do something with the epoxy resin and find a way to convert that epoxy powder into new virgin grade epoxy resin and put that into new blades, so when we're making new blades. So ultimately trying to see if there's a way for us to include recycled content in when we make new wind turbine blades. So it's a super interesting project, and we're making good progress. It takes time, as these things do. But of course, it's we have found a way to recycle wind turbine blades, which no one actually thought was possible some years back.
But is that something like, if you look in your industry in general, is that something that like distinguishes Vestas, or is there something, you know, do you share this kind of technology or the steps that you take with others? So more.
There has been different approaches to this. Some have been focusing more on how to make the blades more recyclable. So basically, including maybe a different type of epoxy resin into the blade that then in theory make them more easily to recycle. But what was important to us was to actually see if we could find a way to recycle the blades. Because at the end of the day, in the next 10 to 15 years, there will be quite a lot of old blades that will be taken down that needs to be managed. And by focusing on an actual recycling solution, we could address that challenge instead of only being able to recycle the blades that we put up today, but they will not be taken down until 30 years from now. So we wanted to find a way to address the problem or the challenge we have basically tomorrow, not in 30 years from now.
Let's talk about the transformational leadership that is, you know, needed within the organization to be a part of the Great Switch. So, what is the role of leadership in navigating transition to sustainable operations?
It is key for making this happen. It requires constant focus and attention. I think a lot of companies are used to this when it comes to focusing on cost, quality, safety, and so on. And ultimately, sustainability requires the same. It's not something that will happen by itself. You need to translate it into clear KPIs that is shared across the organization to really make sure you drive progress.
Is this something that has been, you know, key within, would you say, within Vestas for a long time, that you see it as one of the main KPIs, or like you handle it as the P&L or whatever? Is that it?
For us,
is that it?
Yeah. I would say that for us, it's been a learning journey. So when we started with this in 2019, the approach we took was that we selected some clear kind of priority projects, as we call it, and those priority projects were based on the CO2 reduction impact or the recycling impact and the value that it would bring to customers. And I think that was a really good approach in the sense that then we got some, you know, real kind of focus into these projects and could make them develop in a quite fast way. But now we also see that in order to really meet our long-term targets, we also need to have KPIs shared across the organization. So now this year we are introducing yearly regional CO2 reduction targets. So every single region within Vestas has a CO2 reduction target, which is then also within that region translated into a CO2 reduction target for the regional service activity, the regional construction activity, and regional the manufacturing activity. So in that sense, now we are really introducing KPIs and targets across the different regions and across the different regional activities. And you could say, should we have done that from the beginning? Well, maybe, but I think we probably also needed to capture some learning from this fast, and ultimately, I can also see that by really focusing on some core priority projects, also meant that we could really get some results out of them fast. But now, when we need to take it to the next level and really kind of, you know, how do we reach our very ambitious long-term targets? It needs to be more ingrained in all parts of the business. So that we have done, and similar also, which I spoke about earlier, that we have introduced CO2 reduction targets for the different teams working on the different components, so towers, nacelle, and blades. we have now also included as part of our priorities in the Vestas company strategy. So that of course also means that you kind of have that framing that this is something that is important to the company. So yes, I'm a strong believer that it needs to be handled in the same way as other priorities, such as cost, quality, safety, where you have clear KPIs. That's what brings attention and focus, follow-up, reporting, and so on.
So that is, would you say that just making it, or just making it, but a part of your KPIs and handling it like every other measurement?
No, I mean, KPIs, of course, doesn't solve the problem, right?
No, do you feel like there is something else needed to get your key stakeholders, on board on this mission, or?
Yeah, so.
Like, is it diverse in any way from as you mentioned, the more economical part or stuff like that?
I think often engagement is not often the issue. I think at least when I look at Vestas and the fantastic employees that we have, I mean, they really want to contribute to this. I mean, many of them have joined Vestas for a reason and to contribute to further reducing our CO2 footprint or waste footprint is not something that you often need to persuade them to do, or I mean, it's something that everyone actually wants to do. Where I think perhaps sometimes and there of course we come in and support from the group sustainability team, but also our wider sustainability community we have in the company. It's more on that might be that they don't really know how to quantify CO2 reductions, or what are the things they actually can do, or giving some tips and tricks in terms of, well, if we use less material, that's often good from a cost reduction point of view, but that also has a CO2 reduction benefit, of course. So it's perhaps more that they feel a bit insecure when it comes to the topic itself, but often that is a curve that you will pass eventually.
As you know, Lisa, being in the room, we have a guest with us, another guest to the podcast, and this is no other than Frank Pagnol, Director of Power and Grid within the Nordic Baltic zone of Schneider Electric. Welcome, Frank.
Thank you.
Yeah, nice to have you. Nice to have you. And in each episode that we do, we try to bring in a few questions from like key industry voices, and today that is you, Frank. So I would like to hear, while listening in on this, have you experienced any thoughts or something that you would like to surface and maybe ask Lisa or
Yeah, thank you, Lisa, for sharing about Vestas sustainability culture. I catch some points on the circularity roadmap, the design, the operation, the material recovery. Maybe one question: what strategic priorities will guide Vestas in shaping a resilient energy future?
Linked to the circularity roadmap.
Yes.
Yes. So hi, Frank. Great that you and I also got to exchange a bit. So our circularity roadmap is something we've had in place for a couple of years, and that is essentially the roadmap we have to deliver on our ambition to produce zero waste wind turbines by 2040. I've spoken a lot about blade recycling here today, but that is of course a key element of our circularity roadmap to make sure that all the different components of the wind turbine can be recycled. But then, as part of the circularity roadmap, we're also looking very much at reducing our own waste from our own operations and increase recycling of the waste that we still produce. So for that, we have introduced recycling targets for all our factories. And we're doing quite well. We have, by end of 2024, we had reached 68% recycling from our factories, and we are expecting to reach 70% here by 2025, which is also aligned with the targets we have in the circularity roadmap. beyond that, we also very much want to increase the number of repaired and refurbished parts. So we have a repair and refurbishment business within Vestas. So basically, when instead of just taking down old parts or damaged part and put up a new one, can we actually take them back and repair or refurbish them and then sending them off again to a wind turbine. So basically keeping parts and materials in the loop for longer. So we give materials and parts a longer life. And then also beyond that, but there we still have some more work to do. Is that we also ultimately want to see how we can reduce waste from our supply chains. Those are the key elements of our circularity roadmap. But a very strong focus for now has been on blade recycling, but also to increase the recycling rate from our factories. Yeah.
And you mentioned the recycling of the blade itself, with the life cycle about 20 to 30 years. What's about the nacelle and the other part of the wind turbine?
Yeah, so most of the other components are actually recyclable today. So of course the nacelle is also of course has a steel cover. So that is not something we are focusing too much on today. We're focusing on the parts that has been really, really difficult to find routes for historically, those are the blades.
And maybe the last question, how Vestas is influencing the market, your competitor or colleagues in the industry, to invest in their sustainability roadmap?
I think when we launched our sustainability strategy back in early 2020, we were quite early on, and I believe that we have influenced the industry in this direction. I mean, we were the first one out with the sustainability strategy and circularity roadmap and pushing this really forward. But we also see, of course, initiatives coming now from other parts of the industry, which is great. I mean, this is something that, of course, is an industry effort to make sure we make our industry even more sustainable. So, but I do believe that we were part of really kind of pushing this forward by launching an ambitious strategy and circularity roadmap back in 2020.
Thank you, Lisa. It was very inspiring to listen to you today.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Frank. And we'll be having you with us until the end of the episode. So feel free to break in if you'd like. So we have already discussed Vestas' ambitious goals for sustainability. But if we look beyond the 2030 targets, what do you imagine being the vision for the future for Vestas?
Yeah, so the sustainability journey, of course, never ends. And as we grow and scale as an industry, of course, the sustainability work will become even more critical. And I think there is still a lot more work to be done, as an example, to make sure that we really ingrain CO2 and waste reductions as part of all our decision making, as we have done with, for example, cost, quality, and safety. But what I also will be interesting to see is that as CO2 prices is expected to go up in Europe with the sharpening of the emission trading scheme, I think that's going to be interesting to see what kind of impact that will have in terms of speeding up the uptake of less CO2 intensive materials, fuels, and so on. I also look forward to see more recycled content in the future. So keeping materials in the loop. I've talked about how we will try to see if we can use recycled epoxy resin when making new wind turbine blades. But I very much look forward to see that we can use even more recycled content. And then, of course, also another thing is biodiversity. I think that's something that is a topic that will become more and more important for our industry. And what I look forward to see is how we can use technical solutions for the wind turbines to support our customers in reducing or minimizing biodiversity losses when we are constructing wind farms. those are the things that I look forward to be part of developing and spending more time on. Yeah.
So a lot to look forward to.
There is a lot more to be done.
We are getting close to the end of this episode. Before saying our goodbyes, I would like to hear about like your number one advice for executives working towards accelerating sustainability, like the sustainable switch. What would the number one advice from you be?
Oh, there are so many. But if I was forced to choose one, I would say prioritize and be concrete. I think that is my learning from integrating or working with our sustainability journey. I think if you in order to kind of keep the organization engaged and motivated, it needs to be really clearly defined, and it needs to be focused. The work that you do, really define the projects you want to work with and make sure that that is clear and understandable for the organization. And I think be persistent as well. I think that's this is a long journey. There will be hiccups along the way, but I think everyone agrees that there's no other choice than to really focus on sustainability. So even though there might be some bumps on the road, be persistent.
That's being persistent. Yeah, that's a nice way of wrapping up this episode, I believe. Thank you so much, Lisa. We have, at least I have learned a lot about your company, how you operate, and the ambitious goals, and how you operate in this market and making a positive impact on this world. So, thank you very much for joining us. Hope to see you guys again. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
The content of this podcast is for informational purposes only, should not be undertaken as financial, economic, legal, business, tax, or investment advice. The information, statements, views, and opinions should not be construed as the provision of advice by Schneider Electric, or as an offer to buy or sell any products or services, or to make or consider any investment or course of action.